Our students take several assessments throughout their school career. Here in Indiana, iLearn is an example. In Michigan, MSTEP. Those tests show where students are compared to state standards and compared to other schools. Well, between January and March of this year, the National Assessment of Educational Progress, or NAEP assessments, were given to random samples of kids from each state and territory. Indiana leaders say around 7,000 Hoosier 4th and 8th graders took those tests. The results were released last week in the nation's report card.
NAEP is the only assessment that we can compare Indiana to how every other state and territory is doing across the nation. And that's important to understand, especially as we think about what strategies have worked in other states.
That's Katie Jenner, Indiana's Secretary of Education.
So nationally and in Indiana, we knew before we even received the results that we have some work to do.
LY, if it's a suffix, it has
Nationally and in Indiana, the results showed the drastic impact the pandemic had on learning. In math, Indiana fared better than in most states. In reading,
we scored at national average, which typically as a state, we score above national average in math and reading. So our reading scores, we've actually been seeing a decline in 4th grade reading scores since 2015 when we look at our NAEP data.
Here's what the data shows, and you can view this yourself online. In reading, the average score for 4th graders in the nation was 216. In Indiana, the score was 217. In Michigan, it was 212. And in 8th grade, the national score for 8th graders was 259. In Indiana, it was 261. In Michigan, it was 259. And in math, the average score for 4th graders nationally was 235. In Indiana, it was 239, and in Michigan, it was 232. And 8th graders, the national score in math was an average of 273. In Indiana, it was 279. In Michigan, it was 273. What this tells us is that students in Indiana and Michigan are doing about the same as the average student around the country. But that's because since 2019, average scores fell everywhere. The report also shows how states did compared to other states and where the largest gaps are. This is where the data is especially troubling. For both Indiana and Michigan, Black students and Hispanic students scored much lower than the average white student. And free and reduced meal students also scored much lower than students who weren't eligible. So here's a couple examples. In 4th grade math in Michigan, Black students on average scored 35 points lower than white students. And free and reduced lunch students scored around 28 points lower than non-eligible students on average. And another example in Indiana. On 8th grade math, Black 8th graders scored 38 points lower than white students, and free and reduced lunch students scored 26 points lower than non-eligible students. That's in math for 8th grade here in Indiana.
This is an all hands on deck strategy. We all have to work together to make sure that every child in Indiana can read and has the proficient math skills.
State leaders say there are resources available for families and investments are being made in schools across the state to help bring scores up. I'll put a link to this data on our website so you can look at it more closely. Also, you'll be able to see the specific investments Indiana state leaders say they've made in reading and math education. And coming up on Wednesday, why some school districts are now looking to Mishawaka for ways to raise student achievement. In the studio, Kristen Bean, WSBT 22 News.